Gildan Media, a division of Recorded Books, presents U.S. History for Dummies, 4th edition, by Steve Wiegand, narrated by Al Kessel. Publisher's Note: this audiobook has bonus material, which is available at dummies.com/go/get access. You will see a drop-down menu and an option for the audiobook edition of this book, U.S. History for Dummies, 4th edition. The code phrase for accessing this bonus material is Liberty and Freedom, in all lowercase letters. Limited Liability Disclaimer of Warranty. The publisher and author make no representations or warranties with respect to the accuracy or completeness of the contents of this work, and specifically disclaim all warranties, including without limitation, warranties of fitness for a particular purpose. No warranty may be created or extended by sales or promotional materials. The advice and strategies contained herein may not be suitable for every situation. This work is sold with the understanding that the publisher is not engaged in rendering legal, accounting, or other professional services. If professional assistance is required, the services of a competent professional person should be sought. Neither the publisher nor the author shall be liable for damages arising herefrom. The fact that an organization or website is referred to in this work as a citation and/or a potential source of further information does not mean that the author or the publisher endorses the information the organization or website may provide or recommendations it may make. Further, readers should be aware that Internet websites listed in this work may have changed or disappeared between when this work was written and when it is read. Introduction. Those who cannot remember the past, said American philosopher George Santayana, are condemned to repeat it. Generally in the 12th grade. Lots of people think of learning U.S. history as a punishment. It's a subject you had to take in school. You memorized a bewildering array of dates, absorbed definitions for terms like manifest destiny, and wondered whether America really needed 2 presidents named Harrison. Historical figures were presented as if they were characters in a junior high school costume pageant. Their blemishes were airbrushed out, and their personalities were drained away. Sure, you were taught George Washington warned the country about foreign entanglements in his farewell address, but it might have been more interesting to also learn he never actually gave that speech. It was printed in the newspapers. Washington didn't like giving speeches, partly because of his false teeth, which were not made of wood, but of hippopotamus ivory. Alas, textbooks often overlook the fascinating moments and details of U.S. history. They present it as something dry and distant, events, facts, trends, movements, and don't focus on what it really is. U.S. history is the story of people, what they thought, did and tried to do, what they ate and drank, what made them angry, and what made them laugh. About this book. This book is not a textbook, nor is it an exhaustive encyclopedia covering everything that ever happened in the United States. Instead, it focuses on people, famous and infamous, well-known and obscure. It gives you a basic foundation of information about U.S. history. You can use it as a handy reference, haul it off the shelf to settle an argument, or to start one. Which brings me to a key point. This book is not 100% straight down to the middle you'll agree with everything objective. Although I've tried to stick to the facts, or at least the most widely accepted historical interpretations of the facts, the bottom line is that my own thoughts, biases, and interpretations will inevitably intrude. It happens in every nonfiction book ever written. Sorry. If you think something is factually wrong, please let me know. If you just don't agree with something, object. You're reaffirming one of the best things about America, the right to freely express indignation. Because U.S. history hasn't always been bright and shining, especially when it comes to topics such as slavery or the treatment of Native Americans, this book doesn't always deal with pleasant or uplifting subjects. Some of what you read may anger you, sadden you, or even make you feel a little ashamed. In that regard, America's history shares something in common with just about every country ever. But the truth is that overall, America's story is a positive one. For a nation in its 3rd century, America still does a whole lot of things right. One of them is recognizing past mistakes and generally, and sometimes gradually, striving to do it better. Enough time on the soapbox. I'm also happy to report you can find things in this book that you won't find in other U.S. history books, which may or may not be a good thing depending on your sense of humor or taste for trivia. Although they may be of little importance in the overall scheme of things, they're kind of fun to know and trot out at dinner with your boring in-laws. Some examples. The Civil War general whose name helped to popularize a common term for prostitutes, Joseph Hooker. Which canned meat product helped win World War II? Spam. And the Major League Baseball team that overcame the curse of a man with a goat, Chicago Cubs. And if you're a history purist, I think there's a mention of Manifest Destiny in here somewhere. Foolish Assumptions. I'm assuming you picked up this book because you have some interest in U.S. history, which is why I chose the title. But it doesn't matter if you know a little or a lot about the subject. I think you may enjoy it either way, even if it's just to settle arguments about the Louisiana Purchase, Chapter 7, or what Iceland had to do with the Great Recession, Chapter 22. Enough facts are in here to make this a good, if I do say so myself, basic U.S. history book, and enough trivia to irritate party guests who won't go home. Beyond the book. You got more than you bargained for when you bought this book. In addition to what you're reading right now, this product also comes with a free Access Anywhere cheat sheet that puts scads of facts about U.S. history at your fingertips. You'll be able to make substantive points in discussions about politics, impress potential employers as a well-rounded individual, and convince people you actually remember something from the 11th grade. To get this cheat sheet, simply go to Dummies.com and search for U.S. History for Dummies 4th edition cheat sheet in the search box. This product also comes with an online test bank of practice questions to test your knowledge. To gain access to the online practice, 1. Find your PIN access code. Print book users. If you purchased a print copy of this book, turn to the inside front cover of the book to find your access code. E-book users. If you purchase this book as an e-book, you can get your access code by registering your e-book at dummies.com/go/getaccess. Go to this website, find your book, and click on it. Answer the security questions to verify your purchase. You'll receive an email with your access code. 2. Go to dummies.com and click on Activate Now. 3. Find your product and then follow the on-screen prompts to activate your PIN. For audiobook listeners, please refer to the publisher's note in the very beginning of this book. Icons used in this book. Throughout the book, you will hear verbalized icons that alert you to particular aspects or features of history. Here's what they mean. Technical stuff. The names, numbers, and other stats behind the news are the focus of this icon. Remember. This icon alerts you to a fact or idea that you may want to stash in your memory bank. Where to go from here? Congratulations! By reading this far, you've already learned something about U.S. history. It doesn't bite, induce deep comas, or poke you in the eye with a sharp stick. Continue on, and you may get the itch to keep going even further. Remember, history is the story of people, and people are the most interesting story of all. Part 1. Getting Started with U.S. History. In this part, the early settlers make their way in a new land. The colonies establish themselves. The American Revolution leads to the creation of a new country. Chapter 1. America, a Short Biography. In this chapter, tracing America's roots, establishing a national identity, dealing with growing pains, fighting wars of a different kind, donning a new look for a new millennium. Long before it was a nation, America was an idea, a dream, a fanciful tale. For most of humankind's history, it didn't exist as anything but a blank slate, waiting to be filled. Eventually it was filled, with people who came for all sorts of reasons and with all sorts of ideas on how to assemble a country. Sometimes the ideas and the people clashed. But out of the clashes and struggles grew a country founded on a system of government that made it unique in the world. America was lucky to have great leaders in bad times when it most needed them. It had abundant natural resources, generally peaceable neighbors, and plenty of room to grow. And boy, did it grow! But before all this could happen, someone had to transform it from a fantasy to a very real place. This chapter gives you the lowdown on how that came about, and directs you to the places in the book that give you the nitty-gritty in more detail. They came, they saw, they stayed. The first Americans probably wandered over from Asia about 14,000 years ago, which in geologic terms is an eye blink ago. Over the succeeding 4 or 5 millennia, they spread out over the North and South American continents. There weren't a whole lot of these first Americans, at least not in what became known as the United States of America, but they were wildly diverse in their customs and culture. Many of the differences had to do with the environment in which they settled. Around AD 985, Northern Europeans, popularly known as Vikings, showed up on the North American continent, but stuck around only long enough to irritate the Native Americans. But two things, greed and imagination, prodded other Europeans into taking their place. Looking for a new route to the riches of the East, particularly spices, explorers, such as an Italian weaver's son named Christopher Columbus, thought they might sail west around the globe until they hit Asia. Of course, the Americas got in the way. Rather than reverse course, Columbus and his counterparts refocused their priorities to exploring and exploiting the New World. The exploiting part of that plan included enslaving or killing off the native population. Sometimes the killing was deliberate. Sometimes it was inadvertent, through the introduction of diseases for which the Native Americans had no defenses, for example. See Chapter 2 for more details on Native Americans and explorers. Catching up to the Spanish. Spain got a head start in the Americas, mainly because it was the first to get enthusiastic about exploring the Americas. But other European countries eagerly sought to catch up. France split its efforts between colonizing and just carting off resources like fish and furs. But the English took steps to make their presence more permanent. English settlements were founded for both economic and ecclesiastical reasons. In the South, colonists hoped to make money by growing tobacco, and later cotton. To make their enterprises more profitable, they imported slaves from Africa. It was a practice that would prove far costlier in terms of human misery than the crops were ever worth. In the North, settlers who had fled religious persecution established colonies based more on religious principles than making a buck, although they weren't averse to the latter. Like the Spanish, English settlers often found the easiest way to deal with the Native Americans was to shove them aside or kill them. The English colonies grew rapidly. Chapter 3 has the stories of pilgrims, Puritans, and entrepreneurs. It's revolutionary. It was probably of small comfort to the Native Americans, but the French and British also spent an inordinate amount of time killing each other. Throughout much of the 18th century, the two nations squared off in a series of wars that were fought in both Europe and the New World. When the dust settled, Britain had cemented its position as top dog among the European powers in North America. But a new power, whose members increasingly called themselves Americans, was beginning to assert itself. Stung by slights, both real and imagined, from the mother country, American colonists grew restless under British control. In 1776, after a series of provocations and misunderstandings, the colonies declared themselves independent. Details about the pre-Revolution period are in Chapter 4. The American Revolution took 7 years for the colonists to win. To do so took a brilliant leader in George Washington, a timely ally in France, and healthy helpings of tenacity and luck. Chapter 5 has the details. Making a country out of the victorious colonies also took tenacity, luck, and genius. Over the summer of 1787, a remarkable group of men gathered in Philadelphia to draw up the rules for the new nation. The United States of America elected Washington as its first president, set up a reasonable financial system, and avoided war with European countries long enough to get itself established. All these events are in Chapter 6. Putting America on the map. Thomas Jefferson was a great example of America finding the right man at the right time. He helped the country make a smooth transition from one political party being in charge to another. Plus, he had the imagination to pull off a pretty big land deal, the Louisiana Purchase. That not only doubled the size of the country, it gave Lewis and Clark a good reason for an expedition. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court asserted itself as a co-equal branch of government. That's all in Chapter 7, along with fighting pirates and getting into another war with Great Britain. Spoiler alert, it ended in a draw. Nationalizing a nation. The end of the War of 1812 also marked the fading of the Revolution generation. People increasingly began to identify themselves as Americans rather than New Yorkers or Virginians. But it wasn't the end of tensions among sections of the country when their interests diverged. Those divergent issues included fights over banking, tariffs, and especially slavery. With the invention of the cotton gin, growing the fiber became quite profitable in the South, and along with a surge in sugar growing, made the region intensely dependent on slave labor. Many people in northern states opposed slavery for a variety of moral, political, and economic reasons. A fight over the question of allowing slavery to spread was avoided, at least temporarily, with a fragile compromise in 1820. Beyond its borders, the United States was nervously watching European nations who were avariciously watching former Spanish colonies in Latin America gain their independence. In 1823, President James Monroe formally warned Europe to keep its hands off of the Americas. Not all the political squabbling was international. In 1824, a crusty military man-turned-politician named Andrew Jackson lost a hotly contested and controversial election to John Quincy Adams. In 1828, Jackson avenged the loss after one of the sleaziest campaigns, by both sides, in U.S. history. As president, Jackson found himself confronted by a theory, most eloquently championed by South Carolina Senator John C. Calhoun, called nullification. It held that states could decide for themselves which federal laws they did and did not have to obey, The theory served to deepen the divide between North and South. Despite a national recession brought on by speculation and shady financial dealings, Americans were busy coming up with ways to make life better. Improvements in equipment triggered a boom in railroad building. The development of steel plows and rolling harvesters greatly enhanced grain production. And the invention of the telegraph signaled the start of a national communications medium. Down in Texas, meanwhile, American expatriates led a successful revolt against Mexico and then waited for 9 years to become part of the United States. The annexation of Texas, in turn, helped start another war. Chapter 8 has a lot of stuff in it. Fighting with a neighbor. In 1844, America elected its first dark horse, or surprise, presidential candidate. He was James K. Polk. Polk was a hard worker with a yen to expand the country to the Pacific Ocean by acquiring territory from Mexico. Polk saw it as the nation's manifest destiny. Mexico saw it as intolerable bullying. After the Mexican government refused to sell, Polk sent U.S. troops to the border. A fight was quickly provoked, and just as quickly escalated into a war. The Americans' quick and decisive victory resulted in their grabbing of about 500,000 square miles of Mexican territory, comprising much of what became the western United States. These actions not only fulfilled Polk's vision of manifest destiny, but also gave California to America. That addition proved to be particularly fortuitous when gold was discovered there in early 1848. By the end of 1849, the California gold rush had sparked a human stampede and given America all the elbow room it would need for decades. That was a good thing, because immigration was again booming, particularly from Ireland and the European states that would become Germany. But the acquisition of Mexican territory also renewed the struggle to balance the interests of slave states and free states. In 1850, Congress worked out a 5-bill compromise. California was added as a free state. The free or slave question was postponed in other areas of the former Mexican lands, and Congress enacted a law that made it easier for slave owners to recover fugitive slaves. While a movement to give women rights and opportunities equal to men's began to gather steam in the 1850s, the slavery issue overshadowed it. Violence broke out in Kansas and Virginia. An 1857 Supreme Court decision that held that slaves had no more rights than mules infuriated slavery opponents. And in 1860, the badly divided country gave a plurality of its votes to a 51-year-old Illinois lawyer in a 4-way race for the presidency. The election of Abraham Lincoln was the last straw for Southern states, which began leaving the Union. See Chapter 9 for accounts of the war with Mexico, the California Gold Rush, and America's divorce from itself. Fighting among ourselves. Talk about timing. America had its best president at the worst time in its history, the Civil War. Underestimating Lincoln was easy, and many did. But he had a knack for getting the best out of most of the people around him, and a self-deprecating sense of humor that disarmed others. Lincoln was no fan of slavery, but even more important to him was preserving the Union. The North seemed well equipped to accomplish that. It had a larger population, better manufacturing and transportation systems, and an established navy and central government. The South had the home field advantage in better military leaders, and it only had to fight to a draw. While the North was largely successful in establishing a naval blockade of southern ports, the South won most of the early land battles. Its best general, Robert E. Lee, even succeeded in taking the fight to northern territory for a while. But eventually, the North's superiority in numbers and supplies asserted itself, and the tide turned. It took 4 years and 600,000 American lives for Northern forces to prevail. restore the Union, and end slavery. But less than a week after the surrender of the South's main army, Lincoln was assassinated. With him went the nation's best chance of healing its wounds. The details are in Chapter 10. Making up is hard to do. The post-war South was a mess, and that's putting it mildly. The infrastructure was wrecked, the economy in shambles, and the best and brightest of its leaders gone. Millions of African Americans were free, with no education, no place to work, and nowhere to go. With Lincoln gone, many of the North's leaders were more in the mood for revenge than for reconstruction. Andrew Johnson, Lincoln's successor, had few friends in Congress and fewer leadership skills. Such a climate resulted in the North imposing draconian laws on the South, which led, in turn, to economic and physically violent reprisals by white Southerners on black Southerners. Reconstruction efforts suffered further when the great Northern general, Ulysses S. Grant, turned out to be a not-so-great president. Political corruption infected every level of government. The corruption peaked, or bottomed out, with a sleazy deal that gave the 1876 presidential election to a former governor named Rutherford B. Hayes. It's all there in Chapter 11. Struggling with greatness. With the North-South struggle over, America began stretching west in earnest. Great tracts of land were available to settle, and money could be made in mining, ranching, and farming. Tragically, that meant pushing out or bumping off the original human residents. Most of America's surviving Native Americans were on the Great Plains. But by 1890, wars, murders, disease, starvation, and forced emigration had largely solved the Indian problem. Other minorities fared little better. In the South, the failures of the Reconstruction led to a series of Jim Crow laws that sanctioned racial segregation. Immigration from China was temporarily banned in 1882, and the ban lasted 6 decades. Immigrants from other nations poured in, however, many of them populating vast slums in rapidly growing cities. But big business boomed in what Mark Twain dubbed the Gilded Age. Railroads, steel, and oil were the objects of monopolistic cartels, and new industries sprang up around new inventions like the telephone and electric lighting. With its frontier rapidly settled, America cast its eyes beyond its borders. In 1898, it went to war with Spain. The conflict lasted 4 months and resulted in Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines becoming U.S. territories. See Chapter 12 for details. Finding a place in the world. As the 20th century began, the nation marched along to the twin drums of imperialism, running other people's countries for America's benefits, and progressivism, improving the bad habits of big business and big politics. At the forefront of both was a human dynamo named Theodore Roosevelt. The country was also undergoing labor pains, with unions striving, often violently and not very successfully, with business leaders. Women were also struggling to gain a place in the polling booth and in the pay line. Chapter 13 winds up with America trying to stay out of World War I and failing. America's participation in the war turned out to be a good thing for the rest of the world, as it helped the war get over with sooner. Roaring through the 20s. After the war, America decided to mind its own business and restricted immigration to keep the rest of the world out. It also gave up drinking, at least legal drinking. Prohibition resulted in a lot of illegal drinking, which seemed in turn to affect the country's mores in other areas. America also elected a string of rock-ribbed Republicans as president, all of whom did what they could to make the rich richer. Everyone else made do by buying things on installment plans and looking for ways to get rich themselves. And Americans spent their increasing leisure time going to the movies, listening to the radio.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?